All right, welcome back everyone to the HIV RNA Test Guide podcast, the place to be for all things HIV.
Absolutely.
Today we're going deep on something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about, different aspects of HIV.
Yeah.
But today we're talking about HIV and cortisol.
Yeah.
And I think when people hear cortisol, they think stress.
Right.
Exactly. Hormones and stuff.
Yeah.
But this is a little bit different than that.
This is a lot different than that.
So tell me a little bit about, the connection between HIV and cortisol.
Sure. So HIV is a really, really sneaky virus.
Yeah.
And it does a lot more than just attack your immune system directly.
Okay.
And one of the things that it seems to be doing is affecting how your body produces and uses cortisol. So cortisol is a hormone that's really important for our bodies. It plays a role in regulating our energy levels, our metabolism, our immune system, even our mood.
Right.
So it's kind of a big deal.
So how does HIV get involved in all that? How does it mess with that?
That's the million-dollar question, right? So what scientists have found is that the HIV-1 genome, that's the genetic blueprint of the virus, seems to be interfering with the activity of what we call glucocorticoid receptors.
Glucocorticoid receptors?
Glucocorticoid receptors.
Okay.
These are basically little doorways that cortisol uses to enter cells and do its job. So it's almost like HIV is jamming the lock on the door, preventing cortisol from getting where it needs to go.
Interesting.
But it gets even more complicated than that.
Okay.
HIV also seems to be stimulating the production of another hormone called ACTH.
ACTH.
Yes, or adrenocorticotropic hormone.
Oh my.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But basically, this hormone acts like a messenger telling your adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys, to pump out more cortisol.
Oh, wow.
And here's the kicker. This seems to be happening completely independent of the normal hormonal pathways.
So HIV's really taking over.
It's like HIV is going rogue, hijacking the stress response system.
Wow. And so what are the consequences of that?
So the consequences are pretty significant because when you have elevated cortisol levels, it weakens your immune system, which is obviously not good news when you're already dealing with HIV. It's like adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really crazy. Studies are actually showing that increased cortisol might help HIV replicate faster.
So it's almost like a double whammy.
Exactly.
It weakens the immune system.
Right.
And then it makes HIV.
And it gives HIV a boost.
Oh my God.
It's a vicious cycle that can really accelerate the progression of HIV.
And this all ties into AIDS too, right?
Yes, absolutely. So when we talk about AIDS, which is the most advanced stage of HIV infection, excess cortisol is playing a really big role there.
Okay.
It further contributes to the immunosuppression that defines AIDS, making people much more vulnerable to opportunistic infections.
So all this is really important for our listeners to understand because, it's
not just about HIV attacking immune cells directly.
Right. It's about all these other things that are going on in the body.
Exactly.
So is there any hope?
Oh, there's always hope. Research is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And there are some really promising areas that we're looking at.
Okay, like what?
Well, one of the things that's really caught our attention is the potential role of vitamin C.
Vitamin C.
Yes.
Interesting.
In mitigating some of these negative effects of cortisol.
Okay, so how would vitamin C work?
So vitamin C is a powerful antioxidant.
Okay.
And it has the ability to modulate or adjust immune responses. And one way it may do this is by protecting certain immune cells, like T cells, from the damaging effects of cortisol.
So it's protecting those cells
Exactly.
that are already under attack.
It's like giving them a little extra shield.
I like that.
And there have been studies showing that vitamin C supplementation might actually help improve immune function in people living with HIV.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's definitely promising.
So is this something that people should be, talking to their doctors about?
Absolutely. It's always important to talk to your doctor about any potential supplements or treatments.
Especially with HIV.
Especially with HIV, right?
Because everyone's different.
Everyone's different, and there can be interactions.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a conversation worth having.
So to kind of wrap things up today.
Sure.
We've learned a lot about HIV and cortisol.
Yeah, it's a complex connection, but it's one that we're learning more about all the time.
And it sounds like there's some hope out there with potential new treatments.
Absolutely.
Like vitamin C.
Research is ongoing, and that's really where the hope lies.
Now, we all know cortisol, right?
Yeah.
It's that hormone that kind of kicks in when we're feeling the pressure, that fight or flight response.
Yeah, absolutely. Gets your heart racing, your palms sweating, all that fun stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not just about that adrenaline rush feeling, right?
No, not at all.
Cortisol also has a big role in how our immune system works.
It does. Really important one, actually.
And what's really got us diving deep today is some research that suggests this whole HIV cortisol link. Well, it might be even more significant than we initially thought.
And it could really change how we approach treatment for HIV in the future. That's the exciting part.
Okay, so let's jump right in. I was reading through some of the research you sent over, and I gotta admit, one thing really stood out to me. This idea that the HIV-1 genome, like the virus itself, might actually be messing with how our bodies produce cortisol.
Yeah, it's a pretty new discovery, actually, and it kind of just goes to show, I think, how complex HIV really is.
Right. Like, we always knew it targets the immune system.
Yeah.
But now we're finding out it could be messing with our hormones, too.
It's like this whole other layer we're peeling back, and it has big implications for sure.
So how does that even work? How can HIV actually affect cortisol production?
Well, so our bodies have this really neat system for managing cortisol. There's this hormone called ACTH, and basically it acts like a messenger, right?
Yeah.
It tells our adrenal glands, hey, it's time to make some cortisol.
Gotcha.
But for people living with HIV, what we're seeing is the virus seems to be kind of hijacking the system. Like, imagine someone's constantly stomping on the gas pedal, forcing your body to produce more ACTH, and as a result, more cortisol, even when it doesn't really need it.
Oh, I see. So it's like HIV sending the body into this, like, cortisol overdrive.
Exactly.
Okay, but what does that actually mean for someone living with HIV? Like, besides just feeling more stressed, what does that excess cortisol do?
Well, that's where things get even trickier, because this excess cortisol actually starts this whole vicious cycle. See, high levels of cortisol, they actually suppress the immune system.
Right, which makes sense, kind of, because cortisol is supposed to calm things down after that fight or flight response, right?
Yeah, exactly. But in this case, it's calming things down too much. And a suppressed immune system, well, that makes it much easier for HIV to replicate.
Okay. I see where this is going.
And the more HIV replicates, well, guess what? It just further fuels that cortisol production, so you get stuck in this loop that can be really hard to break.
So it's like a double whammy, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the stress of living with a chronic illness, which is stressful enough on its own.
No, not at all.
But then the virus itself is actually contributing to this hormonal imbalance, which then just makes the disease harder to manage.
It's a tough situation for sure.
Okay, but I do remember reading that cortisol isn't always a bad thing, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
It has important functions in the body, too.
Totally. Like you said, it helps regulate inflammation. It actually makes sure our immune response doesn't, go completely haywire.
Right. So it's like, we need some cortisol, but too much of it is the problem, especially with HIV.
Exactly. It's all about balance. And when you have too much cortisol, well, in the context of HIV, it can actually start to interfere with how T cells function.
T cells. Those are what the cells that actually fight off infections, right?
Yeah, they're crucial for a healthy immune system. And when they can't function properly because of too much cortisol, it leaves the body vulnerable, especially to opportunistic infections.
Right, those infections that are common in people with advanced HIV.
Exactly.
Man, this is kind of a bleak picture, huh?
It can feel that way, yeah.
Like this out-of-control cortisol production, a weakened immune system, and a virus that's basically thriving in that environment.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what can we even do about it? Like, what does the research say about possible solutions?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And researchers are working hard to figure that out. Traditional HIV treatments, they focus on suppressing the virus itself.
Right.
But now there's this growing interest in therapies that can, specifically target how our bodies regulate cortisol.
Interesting. So we're thinking beyond just managing the virus itself. We're looking at the whole system.
Exactly. And there's one avenue that's showing some early promise, and it might surprise you.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Hit me.
It's vitamin C.
Wait, vitamin C? Like the stuff we take when we feel a cold coming on. What does that have to do with HIV and cortisol?
Well, it turns out some early studies are showing that vitamin C might actually be able to reduce some of those harmful effects of having too much cortisol. There was this one study, it was published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and they found that giving people high doses of vitamin C actually lowered their cortisol levels when they were going through stressful procedures.
Wow. So it's like vitamin C is stepping in and saying, hey, cortisol, chill out a bit.
That's one way to put it, yeah. Of course, we still need way more research.
Of course, yeah.
To really nail down exactly how it works, what the best doses are, all of that. But it's pretty exciting, I think.
It is, because it's like, we're talking about this really complex disease, HIV.
Yeah.
And maybe something as simple as vitamin C could actually play a role in managing it.
Maybe so.
So I guess if we zoom out a bit,
Yeah.
it seems like the big takeaway here is this, right? This
Mm.
HIV cortisol connection is way more intricate and way more impactful than we might have realized.
Hmm.
It's not just about telling people, hey, manage your stress in a general sense.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's about understanding how this hormone, cortisol, is actively influencing how the disease progresses.
Exactly. And once we understand that, it opens up this whole new frontier in how we think about treating HIV and caring for people living with it.
Okay, so then what needs to change? Like, what are we doing now that maybe we should be doing differently?
Well, if we know stress management and keeping that cortisol in check is so important,
Right.
then it just makes sense to start incorporating things like lifestyle changes, maybe therapies like mindfulness or meditation, even nutritional interventions like we talked about with vitamin C.
Yeah.
Those could all become essential parts of a treatment plan.
Yeah, it's like a whole new way of approaching treatment, more holistic.
Exactly.
Wow, well, this has been a lot to take in. Really eye-opening, I think. For our listeners, I really encourage you to, go out there and learn more about this. The research is always evolving. There's always more to discover.
Definitely. Keep those brains working.
So before we wrap up, is there like one key point that you really want our listeners to walk away with today?
If I had to pick one thing, it would be this. HIV is complicated. We all know that. But it affects so much more than just the immune system, right?
Right.
It impacts our hormones, our mental health, our overall well-being. So as we move forward, I think we really need to start thinking about treatment in this holistic way,
Absolutely.
Address not just the virus itself, but all these other systems it influences. All these interconnected parts. Maybe, just maybe, if we start looking at HIV through that wider lens, we can find even more effective ways to support everyone living with it.
I love that. That's a great point to end on. Thank you so much for sharing all this incredible insight with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
And for our listeners, we hope this deep dive has, gotten those wheels turning, made you think about HIV and its impact on the body in a new way. So stay curious out there and keep exploring. We'll see you next time.